This is the intro video for Algebra 1, Section 8.4. And if you remember in Section 8.3, we added and subtracted radical expressions. So hopefully it seems natural that we would also look at how to multiply and divide radical expressions. So we're going to start off by looking at how you multiply square roots together. So if I've got the square root of a times the square root of b, then the result is the square root of a times b. In other words, you can combine, because the radical, they're both square roots, then I can combine this into simply being the square root of the product of those radicands. So the idea here is if you're multiplying two square roots together, just write one big square root and write the product of the two radicands inside. Okay, so we're going to do two examples here. Here's the first one. This says multiply, then simplify. And so what I'm going to recognize, of course, is that I'm not adding or subtracting, I am multiplying. So when I am multiplying two square roots together, what I do is I write one big square root. I'm just going to start over here on the left. And I write one big square root, and I multiply the two radicands together. So that would be y to the fifth times 6y squared. And then it says simplify. So I've multiplied. I've done that. Now I need to simplify things out. So let's think here. I've got y to the fifth times y squared. When I'm multiplying bases, I add exponents. So this would be 6y to the seventh. And it did say simplify, so I need to keep going here. I need to decide if I can simplify this radical. And in order to do that, I need to write my prime factors. So 6 is 2 times 3. And y to the seventh is just y times itself 7 times. So 4, 5, 6, and then 7 of them. Yep, got them all there. There we go. And so now I'm going to be looking for pairs of like factors. So this is like what we did in Section 8.2. So there's no pair of 2's, there's no pair of 3's, so those are not going to be able to come out of the radical. But there are lots of pairs of y's. There's one pair, there's another pair, and there's a third. So when it comes time to write this in simplified form, I'm going to have my radical. And let's see here. Inside the radical, there's going to be a 2 and a 3. And then this last y was left over. There was nothing to pair that one with. And then coming out, I've got a pair of y's. That gets to come out as a y. I've got another pair of y's. That gets to come out as another y. So I'm going to multiply by that. And then a third pair of y's. That gets to come out as another y. So I end up with y times y times y on the outside. So perhaps fully simplified, this would be y cubed times the square root of 6y for our final simplification there. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at our second example. So in our second example, we're going to look at powers of square roots. And so perhaps you remember from our first section in Unit 8 here, how the square root and squared essentially cancel each other out. So the square root of a squared ends up just being a. All right, so let's think about how that works. Squared, of course, means times itself. So this would be square root of a times the square root of a. And like we just learned in the previous example, when you're multiplying two square roots together, then you make one big square root and you multiply the two radicands together. A times a is a squared. And then, of course, when you're asking yourself what times what is a squared, you get a. So this is one way of looking at this. Let's see if we can apply this example here. So number 2. So number 2 is 4 times the square root of 5 squared. What we could do here is expand this out and write it out as 4 times the square root of 5 times 4 times the square root of 5. That's, of course, what squared means. So what I'll do then is multiply these out, like we learned back in the previous section. We're going to multiply the two 4's together, the two coefficients. So 4 times 4 is 16, and then I'm going to multiply the two radicals together. Square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is the square root of 5 times 5, of course also known as the square root of 25. And to simplify this, we need to recognize the square root of 25 is just 5, and therefore 16 times 5 is 80 would be our final answer there. All right, I hope that worked for you. We're going to continue working on these sorts of questions when I see you in class. See you then.